Research on social cognitive theory. Although social cognitive theory offers a compelling explanation of learning, its value to teachers and others depends on the extent to which its concepts and their proposed relationships are supported by research findings. The research that we summarize in this section falls into three broad categories: correlation studies that have examined how self-efficacy, epistemological beliefs, and self-regulation relate to each other and to achievement; experimental studies that have examined the effect of modeling on self-efficacy, self-regulation, and achievement; and experimental studies that have examined the effect of instruction on self-regulated learning skills. Relationships among self-efficacy, epistemological beliefs, self-regulation processes, and achievement. Social cognitive theory holds that self-efficacy, epistemological beliefs, and self-regulation processes should be positively related to each other, and that both should be positively related to achievement. A number of studies, including the following, support these relationships. For 8th grade students in Sweden, scores on an instrument that measured self-efficacy, as well as self-control and academic self-concept, were strongly and positively related to these same students' self-reported use of goal-oriented strategies. Boys often report having a stronger sense of self-efficacy and lower anxiety than girls for math and science, whereas girls often report having a stronger sense of self-efficacy and less anxiety than boys for writing tasks. 10th grade students who are assigned to complete either a well-structured assignment or an ill-structured assignment, we define and illustrate these concepts in the next chapter, filled out a self-efficacy questionnaire at 6 points during the course of the assignment that assessed both their self-efficacy for learning. For example, I'm confident, I'm learning the basic ideas in this project, and I know which mental techniques would best meet the needs of this project. And self-efficacy for performance, such as I expect to do well on this project, and I believe I will receive an excellent grade on this project. The well-structured task required students to choose a form of cancer and write a report about it that included its causes, symptoms, and treatments, an assessment of their risk for that form of cancer, and a list of behaviors that would likely reduce their risk for that form of cancer. Students who were assigned to the ill-structured task were required to role-play members of a task force who were asked by the government how to best combat cancer and to explain their conclusions in a written report. This exercise was designed to stimulate critical thinking about how government should fund treatment versus preventative measures. Consistent with the prediction for social cognitive theory that the nature of a task affects students' perception of the task's difficulty and their self-efficacy, students' self-efficacy for learning and their task performance were higher for the well-structured task than for the ill-structured task. The researchers also found that at the outset of the task, regardless of whether it was well-structured or ill-structured, self-efficacy for performance was significantly higher than self-efficacy for learning, but the difference disappeared by the end of the task. The more high school students believe that learning occurs quickly or not at all, the more likely they are to have a low grade point average than students who believe that learning occurs gradually. High school students who believe that knowledge was certain were more likely to have lower grades than students who believe that knowledge could be ambiguous and subject to change, even when intelligence and family background were similar. Middle school students combine the epistemological beliefs of quick learning. If I cannot understand something quickly, it usually means I will never understand it. And fixed learning. Some people are just born smart, others are born dumb. Students who are average in school will remain average for the rest of their lives. Into a more global belief in quick fixed learning. Those who had been had more naive beliefs about quick fixed learning were less likely than classmates with more advanced beliefs about quick fixed learning to believe that mathematics was useful to them and were less successful at solving mathematical problems. High school students who had more advanced beliefs about fixed quick ability to learn had higher grades and higher scores on an ill-structured task, a concept we discuss in the next chapter, than did students whose beliefs about fixed and quick ability to learn were more naive. Furthermore, and this will come as no surprise given the gender differences we discussed in Chapter 4, girls had significantly more sophisticated beliefs about fixed quick ability to learn and about certain knowledge than did boys. While the research summarized above notes that self-efficacy, self-regulation, and epistemological beliefs affect how K through 12 students learn, we want you to keep in mind that these variables also affect how you learn. Students in a teacher education program who believed that learning occurred quickly or not at all were less likely to focus on learning how to master a task and improve one's competence, a mastery goal orientation, and were more likely to focus on getting as high a grade as possible while not revealing any academic weakness, a performance avoidance goal orientation, than their peers who believe that learning occurs gradually. We more fully discuss goal orientations, including the two mentioned here in Chapter 11. Effects of modeling on self-efficacy, self-regulation, and achievement. In social cognitive theory, modeling is seen as an effective means of enhancing self-efficacy, teaching students how to use self-regulation skills, and increasing achievement, particularly when the observer is similar to the model or when the observer strongly identifies with the model. Support for the theory has come from a number of studies, particularly ones that focus on skills in mathematics and writing. Improving students' mathematical problem-solving skills. Mathematical problem-solving ability is a difficult skill for many students to master, and it has a prominent place in the curriculum. It is one of the 3 R's. For these reasons, it has often been studied by social cognitive researchers who are interested in the effects of modeling. The research we describe in this section is just a sample of what has appeared in the literature in the past several years. The effect of peer models. Early support for social cognitive theory came from studies like these two. In one, when children watched same-sex peers solve arithmetic problems, they scored higher on a test of similar problems and rated themselves higher on a self-efficacy for mathematical problem-solving scale than did children who either watched an adult model or who worked solely from written instructions. Further proof was provided by a study of middle school students with below-average math achievement scores. These students first watched a teacher solve fraction problems. Then they watched a peer attempt to solve similar problems under the supervision of the teacher. Some of the observing students watched a peer who first made mistakes but overcame them and then performed flawlessly, while other students watched a model solve all the problems without making any mistakes. Because the observing students were low math achievers, it was expected that they would identify more strongly with the model who learned to solve these fractions problems gradually. And that's exactly what the researchers found. Children who observed what was called a coping model reported significantly higher levels of self-efficacy for learning to solve fractions problems and solved significantly more problems correctly than did children who observed a mastery model. A recent review of research on interventions to help students with math disabilities suggests that among the instructional elements that help such students solve math problems, skill modeling can play a major role. Effective self-modeling. A further study took the similarity hypothesis to its logical conclusion by having students use themselves as their model. Children in grades 4, 5, and 6 whose arithmetic achievement was below the 35th percentile were assigned to either a peer model, self-model, peer model plus self-model, or no model condition. Children in the first and third groups watched a videotape in which each of 6 fraction skills was modeled by a teacher and then by 3 same-sex peers under the supervision of the teacher. The teacher demonstrated how to do a problem and then asked the student peer model to do a similar one. The model verbalized the procedure and was then told by the teacher that the solution was correct. Students in all 4 groups were then given written instructions for 6 days on how to solve different types of fractions problems, with an adult present to answer questions, and were videotaped working out similar problems at a chalkboard. After days 4, 5, and 6, children in the self-model and peer model plus self-model conditions watched the videotape of their performance from the previous day, thereby serving as their own model. Although there were no differences among the 3 modeling conditions, students in all 3 scored significantly higher than the students in the no model condition on measures of self-efficacy for solving fractions problems and numbers of fractions problems solved correctly. Improving students' writing skills. Writing skills are also frequently used by researchers to investigate the effects of modeling. Writing is particularly important in the middle school years because writing tasks are more complex than in earlier years and play a larger role in classroom performance. Students who feel poorly prepared to carry out writing tasks tend to be more anxious about them and to spend less time on them. As with the studies we summarized on mathematical problem solving, the research summarized next is just a sample. Modeling for strategy development. As we noted earlier in the chapter, self-regulation skills make significant contributions to achievement, especially when students reach the middle school grades, and modeling can be an effective way to help students acquire these skills. A recent study investigated the feasibility of providing self-regulated strategy instruction in the primary grades. Second grade students who had scored significantly below average on a writing test were assigned to one of 3 groups: self-regulated strategy development plus peer support, and comparison. In 5 steps, pairs of students in the 2 self-regulated strategy development groups were taught a general planning strategy for writing stories and persuasive essays. The strategy invoked picking an idea to write about, organizing one's thoughts, and writing the story or essay. To help the students remember these 3 elements, they were taught the mnemonic POW. They were also taught specific techniques to help them organize their story and generate persuasive essay ideas. For example, to help them write good stories, they were taught to ask themselves such questions as, who are the main characters? When does the story take place? What do the main characters want to do? How does the story end? Students assigned to the comparison condition receive their normal writing instruction from their classroom teacher. Students in the 2 SRSD conditions significantly outscored their peers in the comparison condition in a number of ways. On a post-test administered at the end of the instructional sequence, they spent more time planning their stories and essays, and they wrote essays that were longer, more complete, and of a higher quality. These advantages carried over to the classroom, where the 2 SRSD groups continue to produce not only better quality persuasive essays than the comparison students, but also better quality narrative and information papers as well, for which they had received no specific training. Furthermore, students in the SRSD plus peer support condition wrote persuasive papers for their classroom teachers that were higher in quality than those produced by students in the SRSD only condition. A study published the following year replicated the findings reported by Harris, Graham, and Mason, and also demonstrated that 4th grade students who were taught both a writing strategy and the SRSD strategy produced stories that were of better quality both immediately after instruction and 5 weeks later than either a group that was taught just the writing strategy or a group that was given traditional writing instruction. The writing strategy plus SRSD group also outscored the other 2 groups on a test that required them to write down as much of an orally presented story as they could recall. 2 researchers corroborated the positive effects reported by both of the above studies by analyzing the results of more than 100 studies on writing instruction. They found that the average effect size for SRSD instruction on the quality of students' writing was 1.14 standard deviations, which equates to a score at the 87th percentile, whereas the average effect size for all other types of instruction was 0.62, which equates to a score at the 73rd percentile. This, as you can readily appreciate, is a rather large difference. As an aside, for those who maintain that the best way to improve the quality of students' writing is to adopt a strict back-to-basics approach, the results of this review offer little support. In no study did the explicit teaching of grammar, such as parts of speech and sentence construction, produce better quality writing than the type of instruction with which it was being compared. Observing weak and strong models. In another test of the model observer similarity principle, 8th grade students in a Dutch school were classified as having either low, medium, or high verbal ability, observed a weak peer model and a strong peer model write an argumentative passage. Argumentative passages contain an opinion, such as, "It is better to live in the city than in a village." One or more supporting arguments, for example, the city offers more choices for shopping and going to school. Cities are more conducive to personal growth, and there are more job opportunities in a city. One or more subordinate arguments, for example, cities are more conducive to personal growth because there is a wider range of people to meet and there are more cultural events to attend. And connective words such as because and that logically relate the supporting arguments to the opinion and the subordinate arguments to each other and to the supporting argument. In the study, the weak models omitted critical aspects of an argumentative passage and produced passages that were less coherent than those produced by the strong models. Both weak and strong models verbalized their thought processes, planning what to write and then checking to make sure that it was complete and made sense. One group of students was asked to identify the model who performed less well and to explain why this was the less competent model. A second group was asked to identify which model performed better and to explain why this was the more competent model. Students with low verbal ability who were asked to identify and evaluate the weak model received higher scores on the argumentative passage they wrote than did students with low verbal ability who were either asked to identify and evaluate the strong model or who just practiced writing argumentative passages. Students with high verbal ability who wrote argumentative passages after identifying and evaluating the strong model or who merely practiced with writing argumentative passages received higher scores than did their peers with high verbal ability who identified and evaluated the weak model. Both groups, in other words, seemed to respond better to models they perceived as similar to themselves. Modeling versus practice. Most people have come to believe, partly because of their own experience and partly because of supporting research, that practice makes perfect. But one study provides support for the contention of social cognitive theory that observing a model can be more effective than rote practice in helping students acquire new skills. A group of 9th grade students who worked through a 4-part self-instructional course on argumentative writing. There shouldn't have been a relative pronoun there. They worked through this course. After each part, they participated in one of the following 4 exercises: working individually on writing exercises, watching a videotape of 2 students of the same age who were doing writing exercises and thinking aloud while they wrote, watching a peer doing writing exercises while the peer thought aloud, and then watching another peer verbally analyze the writer's passage, or writing an argumentative passage and then observing a peer analyze the passage while thinking aloud. All students were then asked to write argumentative passages. For example, do you think students should give grades to their teachers that were scored for putting the issue in context, text structure, argumentation structure, and presentation of argument. In other words, or for example, use of paragraphing, markers, and connectors. As expected, students in groups 2, 3, and 4, all the students exposed to modeling of one sort or another, produced better quality argumentative passages than did students who simply practiced their writing. Effects of instruction on self-regulated learning skills. Research clearly shows that training students to use various tactics and strategies is a worthwhile use of the teacher's time. In one study, students who were trained to use a single mnemonic technique outperformed untrained students by a wide margin on subsequent tests of memory, 68th percentile versus 50th percentile, respectively. The effect was particularly noticeable among primary grade and low-achieving students. A similar advantage was found for students who had been taught to use a variety of tactics and were tested for memory and low-level comprehension, 75th percentile versus the controls group's 50th percentile. Although the weakest effect was found in studies in which students were taught a general strategy rather than a specific tactics, these students nevertheless performed significantly better than students who were left up to their own devices. A particularly effective strategy training program is the reciprocal teaching program of Anna-Marie Palanksar and Anne Brown. The program has been used continuously since the 1980s and still attracts considerable attention among teachers and researchers. As the title of the program indicates, students learn certain comprehension skills by demonstrating them to each other. Palanksar and Brown trained a small group of 7th graders whose reading comprehension scores were at least 2 years below grade level to use the techniques of summarizing, self-questioning, clarifying, and predicting to improve their reading comprehension. They chose these 4 methods because students can use them to improve and monitor comprehension. During the early training sessions, the teacher explained and demonstrated the 4 methods while reading various passages. The students were then given gradually increasing responsibility for demonstrating these techniques to their peers, with the teacher supplying prompts and corrective feedback as needed. Eventually, each student was expected to offer a good summary of a passage, to pose questions about important ideas, to clarify ambiguous words or phrases, and to predict upcoming events, all to be done with little or no intervention by the teacher. This approach to strategy instruction is based on Vygotsky's zone of proximal development concept that we mentioned previously in the book. Palanksar and Brown found that the RT program produced 2 general beneficial effects. First, the quality of student summaries, questions, clarifications, and predictions improved. Early in the program, students produced overly detailed summaries and many unclear questions. But in later sessions, concise summaries and questions dealing explicitly with main ideas were the rule. For example, questions on main ideas increased from 54% to 70%. In addition, the questions were increasingly stated in paraphrase form rather than as verbatim statements. Second, the RT-trained students, who had begun the sessions well below grade level, scored as high as a group of average readers on tests of comprehension, about 75% correct for both groups, and much better than a group taught how to locate information that might show up in a test question, 75% correct versus 45% correct. Subsequent research on the effectiveness of RT under both controlled and realistic conditions has continued to produce positive findings across a broad age spectrum, 4th grade through college. On average, students using RT have scored at the 62nd percentile on standardized reading comprehension tests, compared with the 50th percentile for the average controlled student, and at the 81st percentile on reading comprehension tests that were created by the experimenters. In a comparison of strategies designed to improve reading comprehension, half of a sample of 5th grade students with poor reading comprehension skills were taught how to think before reading, while reading, and after reading, TWA for short. Students were taught to think prior to reading about the author's purpose in writing the story, what relevant information they already possessed about the subject, and what they wanted to learn from the passage. While they were reading, they were asked to think about reading at an optimal speed, making connections between prior knowledge and the information in the passage, and rereading parts of the passage they felt they did not understand. After reading, they were asked to think about the main idea and create a summary of the passage and what they learned from the passage. Consistent with social cognitive theory, the elements of this technique were taught through a combination of modeling, direct instruction, and guided practice. The remaining students were taught a questioning technique called reciprocal questioning, parts of which were incorporated into Palanksar and Brown's reciprocal teaching strategy. The heart of reciprocal questioning, or RQ, is the following 5-step procedure. The teacher and the student silently read a passage. The teacher closes his or her book. The students ask the teacher questions, which the teacher answers. The students close their books, and the teacher asks the students questions, which the students answer. As with the TWA strategy, RQ was taught using modeling, direct instruction, and guided practice. Students who were taught the TWA strategy outscored their peers who were taught RQ on ability to orally and accurately state the main idea of the 15 passages they had read, to summarize a given paragraph of each passage, and to retell what they had read. The oral retellings of the students using TWA were of a higher quality and contained more information and main idea units than the retellings of the students who used RQ. Strangely, this advantage did not carry over to parallel written tests of reading comprehension. An excellent example of how social cognitive theory, as well as such related theories as cognitive development and motivation, has been thoroughly integrated into a school curriculum is the Benchmark School in Media, Pennsylvania. Benchmark is a private school that serves students between the ages of 6 and 12 who have experienced several years of academic failure, largely because of such self-regulatory deficits as poor attention, poor listening, working too fast, poor frustration tolerance, organizational difficulties, and lack of willingness to expend effort. To overcome these problems, Benchmark teachers use a variety of techniques derived from social cognitive and other theories, including modeling of cognitive processes, teaching reading comprehension techniques, encouraging the use of background knowledge, teaching note-taking skills, teaching students how to analyze and break down large tasks into smaller, easier to manage parts, teaching reflection and monitoring techniques, and consistently using positive reinforcement. As a result of these and other characteristics of the school, Benchmark students at the end of the 2003-2004 school year scored on average at the 77th percentile on the reading section of a standardized achievement test, whereas they had scored at the 34th percentile 2 years earlier. In addition, almost all students graduate from high school or earn their GEDs and attend college. Despite these positive findings, we need to remind you that applying them in your classroom will be as much an art as a science. You might want to go back to Chapter 1 to review this distinction, because there is much about the nature of self-regulated learning that remains to be clarified. For example, little is known at this present about how long students continue to create and implement learning strategies once formal instruction ends, whether students use SRL skills across a variety of subject areas, and why some students quickly acquire SRL skills and use them efficiently, whereas other students do not. Now that you are familiar with social cognitive theory and research, it is time to examine several suggestions for teaching derived from these principles and research findings. Pause and reflect. A major problem in training students to use learning strategies and tactics is getting the youngsters to spend the time and effort required. Suppose some students expressed a lack of interest, saying their own methods were just as effective, although you knew they were not. How would you convince these students otherwise?